Hello, Alex here, and today we're going to talk about my first roll of Kodak's Aerochrome III, which I shot in the Hasselblad XPan II. Let's get into it. This is the third generation of Kodak's Aerochrome film, a false color, infrared sensitive film which was used in aerial applications such as monitoring foliage health or looking for camouflaged military equipment. As I mentioned in my previous video, chlorophyll reflects a huge amount of infrared light, so in black and white infrared film photography, your foliage turns this brilliant white color, but in false color infrared, it turns this insane ethereal pink to red color depending on exactly which color filter you use. It's absolutely wonderful. This film is unfortunately discontinued, but when it was available in 35mm, 120 and 16mm video formats. The emulsion is coated on a clear S-star base, which is the same base Kodak used for their sheet film color negative films, so Portrait and Nectar. And this is good because it means your actual film base is very, very clear, which is important when you develop this film as slides. As a slide film, you develop it in the E6 chemical process to generate slides. However, you can also cross-process it in C41 chemicals to yield negatives. It is an ISO 400 film, but you should rate it at 320 when cross-processing in C41. I purchased 3 rolls of this film from the Film Photography Project as FPP color infrared film for $207 or $69 each. The film is super panchromatic and sees well beyond the visible light spectrum. As I mentioned in my previous video, red light stops being red and starts being infrared at about 700 nanometers, and this film can see all the way up to 900 in addition to seeing the visible spectrum, which is crazy. To get the infrared look with Aerochrome, you have to use either a yellow or orange filter to cut out the blue light from your scene. As I mentioned, I shot this roll of film through the Hasselblad XPan II. I made sure to tape up the rear window with a bit of electrical tape, and I loaded the film in the dark. This did take a couple of attempts, however, because the base is very thin and the XPan, along with some other auto-load like electronic film cameras, struggle to catch onto a thin base, so you have to open and close the back a couple of times to get it to sit. I'm just putting this out there in case that happens to you. I used all 3 lenses I have for the system, mostly the 30 and the 45, but also the 90mm. I used both number 12 yellow and number 15 deep yellow filters in 49 and 58mm filter sizes, not for any particular reason, that's just the 2 different yellow filters I was able to get in those respective sizes. I used the 2 filters rather than a 58mm filter with a step-up ring because I didn't want to have to go without the lens hood when using the 45 and the 90. I shot this film on a beautiful sunny day, one of the rare sunny days we have in Ireland. I started in Killiney, made my way up the trek to Killiney Hill, took some pictures up there, went back down, and then made my way up to Booterstown where I took some pictures around the beach. I had this film developed as slides in the E6 chemical process by my friend Patrick over at Sprocket Holes. Check out his channel because he's doing some absolutely crazy stuff. He also has 2 rolls of this film, so this was effectively a development test roll for both of us. Our local lab can't guarantee infrared safety with E6 chemistry. That's unfortunate, so Patrick developed it, and we now know that his Jobo system is not just light tight, but infrared light tight as well, and his whole setup is perfect. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, this film is sensitive to both infrared and visible light. This means that you're not shooting at a ridiculously low effective ISO of single digits, 3, 5, 1, like you would be with black and white infrared sensitive films and the visible light blocking filter. Because you're using the infrared and visible light, you're shooting ISO 400 plus 1.5 to 2 stops of exposure compensation, so an effective ISO of like 160 to 100, which means handheld shooting is much more practical. The second benefit that ties into that is because you're using a yellow or orange filter rather than like a Hoya filter that blocks all visible light, you can actually see through the viewfinder if you're using an SLR. That is a huge advantage. Now, for a rangefinder like the XPan, that doesn't matter. But for SLR cameras, that is a huge benefit over black and white infrared sensitive films. Thirdly, obviously, it's incredibly unique to look at. It's very different, and it's one of the films that got me into film after I first heard about it. You know, I dreamed of eventually getting a roll. I was following that one guy in the Russian Federation on eBay, hoping he'd get some in 120. And I was just very, very happy when it appeared on the FPP website, which is why I grabbed 3 rolls immediately. It's so cool. You know, you get these amazing blue and pink tones. It's such an amazing color palette that just works. I mean, that's a pro in itself, right? It's a look that you can't directly replicate any other way on film. It's so cool. The last pro I want to mention is that, unlike a lot of infrared films, because this uses infrared light as well, you don't have to compensate for focusing using the infrared focusing index on your lens if you have one. This also means you can shoot the film with a lens that does not have an infrared focusing index. I'll talk about this more in a future video, but if you know what I'm talking about, you don't even need to think about it with this film, which makes shooting at wide apertures really, really nice. Firstly, the grain. It's an ISO 400 35mm film, so it's going to be a bit grainy. It's expired film, so it's going to be a bit grainy. It's expired slide film, so you can't just overexpose and expect a good exposure, which means you're not fighting against the grain or like overcompensating for it. And it's infrared sensitive, which makes it grainy. It's surprisingly not that bad given all of those factors put together. I would say it's actually less grainy than something like Retrochrome, FPP Retrochrome, expired Ektachrome 400, just normal slide film. But that doesn't mean it's grain free. You know, there is a lot of grain there, especially if you underexpose your images. Secondly, it's stupid expensive. Because it's so coveted and discontinued, there isn't much of it going around. It's gonna run out soon, and that just inevitably drives up the cost. You know, that's just the way it is. Thirdly, it's a slide film, so you have very limited dynamic range. I don't know if that's inherent to Aerochrome or if you get more dynamic range if you cross-process in C41, but I did find a post online where a guy described the dynamic range as -0.5 to +2 EV. 2.5 stops, that's like Velvia kind of dynamic range. So if you haven't shot Velvia before, you really need to nail your exposure. If you've shot other slide films, just be a little bit more careful. On the note of dynamic range, the film obviously doesn't like being overexposed or underexposed, but if you have to choose, overexpose it a little bit. Here's a picture I took where I underexposed by at least a stop to a stop and a half. I don't remember exactly. And it's gnarly. I had to apply over 50,000 Kelvin of white balance just to get this looking like this. It is absolutely horrendous when it's underexposed. Obviously, it's better to nail your exposure, but if you can't, err on the side of overexposure just to be safe. The last negative, and it's a big one, is that a lot of places can't develop this film. As I mentioned, our local lab can't guarantee the safety of infrared E6 film. That's why I got Patrick to do it in the first place. You need to find out in advance if you have access to a lab or someone with a ridiculous Jobo setup who can develop this film for you. If not, what's the point? So with that out of the way, we're gonna go and have a look at my 3 favorite pictures from this roll in our deep dive. So this is my 3rd favorite shot on the roll, and I really like it because although it's not perfectly symmetric, it works quite well in terms of the panoramic format. You have these benches in the foreground, tall trees on the left, slightly less tall trees on the right. It works well overall, but you have a crazy range of pinks and reds in the foliage. I mean, look at the difference between these bushes in the foreground, this deep red here, this dark pink, purple over here. It's insane the range of tones you can get in a single frame when using Aerochrome. You simply cannot get the same range of shades of colors when trichroming black and white film. This is unique to Aerochrome and it exemplifies everything that's great about it. This is my second favorite shot on the roll, and while it isn't my favorite, it's the one I was most excited to see the result of. I saw this squirrel running around when I was down in the forest below Killiney Hill, and I couldn't believe my luck when I saw it wasn't running away from me. I'm pretty good at reading certain types of animals. I do, a lot of squirrel, swan, dog photography, that kind of thing, certain types of birds. So I'm no veterinarian or animal expert by any stretch, but I can kind of read them. And this little guy wasn't that distressed by me at all, didn't seem to mind my presence. This was shot on the 45mm f4, wide open at f4 at like 1/30th or 1/60th of a second. I don't remember exactly. I was struggling to nail focus because I had to focus and recompose, obviously, with the rangefinder. And I was really terrified of motion blur because I was shaky. I was excited. This could have been an amazing shot. And it works. We have a nice blurry out of focus foreground. A lot blurrier than you'd expect from an f4 lens, but that's what you get. Obviously, it's all purple and blue, the blue of the bark, the pink foliage, and then this little squirrel just having a snack. I think it's framed really nicely, or the best I could get in the heat of the moment. And it's sharp, it's well exposed. That's enough for me. I love this shot. This here is my favorite shot of the roll, and I'm gonna cut away and cut back to this. I was hiding in a bush taking a picture of this at the top of Killiney Hill. I felt like an absolute tool. Honestly, that wasn't even planned. I was trying to get a horizontal panoramic shot of the obelisk here at the top of Killiney Hill, and I just couldn't fit it in, even with the 30mm, because while the 30mm is a 17mm equivalent diagonal field of view, a 17mm lens on a 35mm frame would have a lot greater vertical field of view. So I just had to step backwards and backwards and backwards while trying to maintain like a central position so that the obelisk would be more or less symmetrical. You can see it's pretty much symmetrical here. It's not perfect, but it's close enough. The next thing I know, I'm squatting in a bush trying to just find my moment to take the shot while people are passing me with their dogs and kids. This was just serendipity. It wasn't planned to have these two bushes on either side framing the obelisk. Obviously they're not perfect, they're not symmetrical around the obelisk, but I think it works better with the obelisk itself pretty much symmetrical. There's a bit of lens flare, even with the lens hood, the 30mm flares like hell. But this is just another very nice aerochrome shot. You have a very small range of tones here. Light blue, darker blue, light pink, darker pink, a touch of purple, but I think this is really, really nice. The way the sky came out just works so well for this shot. I love it. I hope you like it too. If you want to get into false color, infrared film photography, you have exactly two options. Trichromes with black and white infrared film, or this. This is more expensive, probably less practical after you're out of the field. That's it. You don't have any other option. If you're happy going for digital, you can get the Aerochrome look with a full spectrum converted digital camera and a ColariVision IR chrome filter. If you've seen my previous video where I interviewed Cav, he's doing some absolutely incredible work with a full spectrum converted Nikon Z7 now and Z filter. His shots, they're just pure Aerochrome with all the benefits of modern digital cameras. But it isn't film. And if that matters to you, you have those two choices I mentioned earlier. To the average person, absolutely not. You have all of the drawbacks of slide film, the drawbacks of expired film, most of the drawbacks of infrared film, and it's hard to get developed and it costs a fortune. So no, for the average person, definitely not. But if you're the kind of person who thinks you want to shoot Aerochrome, honestly, I'm not going to be the deciding factor for you. Hopefully some of the information presented in this video is helpful for you, but I'm not going to be the one to tell you or tell you not to buy it. Only you can decide if it's worth the money and effort. Thank you for joining me to the end of this video where we discussed my first roll of Kodak's Aerochrome III, sold as FPP Color Infrared, which I shot in the Hasselblad XPan II. If you like this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at shako1277 for new pictures every single day. We're going to wrap this video up with a gallery of the few pictures I haven't shown you yet, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, and bye bye for now.